I am Anthony from Net, and you are watching 10 Questions. Today I'm here with FJ DeSanto, the executive producer of the Netflix Transformers War for Cybertron Trilogy. I will ask 10 questions about his experiences producing the Transformers, as well as what led him onto that path. Hi, FJ.
Hello. Hello, everybody who's watching. Thank you.
Okay, so I have 10 questions to ask you that I more or less ask everyone, but they're specifically adjusted for you. If you, at any time, your responses leave an opening, I may ask a follow-up question. Are you ready to begin?
Absolutely.
Okay, so question one, what entertained you while growing up?
Well, I grew up, I'm the right age for a lot of the things everybody loves now. I can briefly remember a world without Star Wars where I was a big Trekkie, at a very, very young age. And then, exactly. And then I remember, having my mind blown by Star Wars. And I was always an avid comic reader, especially a DC Comics kid. So I loved Batman in particular, it was the right era. And then I was that also perfect age for the debut of Transformers, so it was like just all those things created this like tsunami of fanboy love, that eventually grew into what I do now. But, I grew up everything, and then eventually manga and anime. I was lucky growing up in New York. We had a TV station that would show early anime stuff like, Space Battleship Yamato, which was called Star Blazers, and Macross, which eventually was Robotech. So, and Gatchaman, which was Battle of the Planets here. So, it was like sort of this melting pot of cool genre stuff that I grew up with, but a little bit of everything. It was a little bit of everything from comics to Star Wars to Star Trek to Transformers to Jackie Chan movies and manga and anime.
So now you've worked in television. Although I'm like, do we consider Netflix television? But you've worked in the industry for a while. So what was your first job in a television crew? Like, what was your experience like?
Well, I'm actually new to television. I come from a producing background. Of how I started in the business was I was at film school at NYU, and I found out the executive producers of the Batman movies had an office in New York City. So I sent them letters, like, hey, I should come work for you. And, I love comics and I want to be in the entertainment industry. And then I got a really nice letter back, one of those, we'll keep your resume on file kind of thing, because I wasn't even done with school yet. But, they were like the only people on earth who actually really do keep the resume on file. And when I got out, they hired me and I worked for them for a number of years. And that was my entry point into the industry. So the first movie I ever worked on, soup to nuts, that I was involved with was a movie called Constantine with Keanu Reeves. And that was sort of like, I was the assistant to the producers on that. It was like 15 years ago, and that was my first experience, on set and developing and things like that. But that's where it started, and so I got lucky that I got to work right away in the industry for people who inhabited the space of all the things that I loved.
Okay, so just to be clear, was it the Adam West Batman people, the Tim Burton
Oh, no,
Batman,
no, no,
or the
no, no.
Chris
Michael
Nolan?
Uslan and Ben Melnick, like so they're the guys I worked for. Now I'm not that old with the Adam West Batman. Two guys named Michael Uslan and Ben Melniker. When Ben Melniker passed away a couple of years ago, he was like 100 and something years old, smartest man I ever met. They were the guys who got the film rights to Batman in the late 70s, and eventually got the Tim Burton movies going. So they've been on all those movies. So when I started working for them, it was in the period after the George Clooney movie, and I was there when the Chris Nolan movies started. So like I was, and when I say like I was there, like I was the junior guy, sort of like eavesdropping in on the meetings and stuff like that, and hoping to get to read the Batman Begins script and stuff like that. So it's those guys, the guys who do the sort of the current feature versions of the last 30 years of it.
So then, what was your title at that point?
At that point, I was probably the president of the company. Like they had a company called Bat Film. And I started off, like I said, as the assistant. Then I ran the company for years. So I was, the VP of development and the president of production or something like that for the company. It's been so long, I don't even remember. But I was there when sort of just running their company. They would have a slate of stuff, of DC related stuff. At one point we were working on Shazam long before it ever got made, and movies movies that never got made, like Adam Strange, we were developing at one point, Doc Savage. And then, the Nolan movies happened. I was there for the first two of those. And then the first movie I produced when I was still working for them was a movie called The Spirit, which Frank Miller wrote and directed, which was based on a classic comic book, which didn't do great. But as a DC Comics fan, to hang out with Frank Miller and work on a movie for a couple of years, in Albuquerque was a lot of fun.
So when did you officially become a producer, or is that all encompassing?
With that movie,
Okay,
with The Spirit. So that was like 10, 12 years ago. Because the thing is, it's such a crazy business. You can set a bunch of things up, but nothing gets made, and you have producing deals. Like I had producing deals for years, but until something actually got produced, you know what I mean? Like, which was The Spirit. That was my sort of first credit as a producer. So
to follow up on that, then, what does a producer typically do for a movie?
It varies. I mean, there was all different kinds of you could have, so for example, I'll sort of jump ahead to what I do, like what I did on The Spirit, and then I'll jump ahead. What I did on The Spirit was a lot of development work, which was working with the writer of the script or the director and sitting in on casting and things like that. And, and then there are other producers who handle the business side of it, the financial side, the raising money or the budgeting. That's not what I do. I'm more a creative producer who sits there and, I'll work with those people to figure out budget if the script is too expensive or something like that. And that's what I would do in features. That's what I do in features, sort of put the package together, like, okay, let me talk to a bunch of writers. Let me talk to a bunch of directors who's right for this. And then how do we take it out and sell it? No one project has the same path, but that's sort of what I do. Whereas jumping ahead to Transformers, which is, I'm a little bit of all that as the showrunner, which is, okay, what's the story? That's my job to figure out. Who are the writers going to be? That's my job to figure out who's, sort of guiding the ship throughout its entire journey. But it varies. Like some projects I'm doing right now, it's more that, on the live action side, it's more that producing stuff. And then other animated shows I'm doing right now, it's, very similar to what I do on Transformers.
So just to separate it out, producing is kind of just handling the overall picture, while executive producer puts everything together.
It varies. I mean, the titles are weird. Like I'm the executive producer on Transformers, but like in animation or TV, it's so hard to explain. That would technically be a producer in features. You know what I mean? Like they have all these weird sort of functions. But yeah, it's not dissimilar to what you're saying. It's just, that's my specific skill set and what I do. Like I have a great producer on the Transformers show, a guy named Matt Murray, who's the supervising producer. You'll sort of see his name in the credits right after mine. He's sort of like the guy who literally manages the engine of the show. Like he handles the day-to-day on, okay, like if I sit there and say, I want to do this, sound design, or I want to go work with this person, he's the guy who's got to go figure it out, the logistics and all that stuff. And without him, I'm just sort of adrift floating around Cybertron, not knowing what to do with myself.
Okay, so can you tell us about your experience as the executive producer of the Transformers Prime Wars trilogy?
Well, Prime Wars was very different. So, for better or for worse, I'm not a big fan of Prime Wars compared to War for Cybertron. But to be honest, Prime Wars is how I got into the whole world of Transformers, and I got sort of, I fell into it. I'm not an animation. I wasn't trained to be an animation guy, but this is sort of where I learned how to do all that. And what happened was, it's going to be like 5-6 years ago now, I got a call from a guy named George Christic, and George was telling me he was going to be the lead writer on a Transformers digital series for Machinima and Hasbro called Prime Wars. And he said, we need a writer, to sort of come in, and everybody's sort of involved with this like super fanboy, like super fanboy. And you're not a super fanboy. Like I'm a Star Wars super fanboy, like a lunatic, right? Transformers, I have like a good knowledge of it, but I'm not like into the movies, and like I know G1, and that was really it. And they want somebody who could come in and balance that. You know what I mean? Like it didn't matter if Optimus went this way in one episode in 1984. It's okay if he goes this way. Like that kind of thing. And to keep everybody, and the irony is now I'm the complete opposite. I'm like a lunatic, when I work on War for Cybertron. But anyway, I got brought in initially to be a writer, executive producer, which sort of meant was, I'd write a few, help break the story, write a few episodes. And because I had some experience working in Japan, I was dealing with the animation studio alongside the showrunner who, there was a showrunner who sort of what I do now in War for Cybertron was sort of the guy setting the creative path of Prime Wars. And when I was on that for Combiner Wars, the first one. So I wrote the first couple episodes, which were, I'm sort of doing all the gossip here. They were sort of rewritten, and George and I in particular intended to do with it. But, it wasn't our show. I'm not the boss of the show. Somebody else goes and does it. And then I was off the show after Combiner Wars. And I was done. The showrunner decided he wanted to do it all himself, et cetera. George and I left the show. And then when they were in the middle of Titan's Return, the second one, I got a phone call from Warner Brothers, which was Machinima and Warner Brothers. And they said, listen, this showrunner is leaving. We'd like you to come in and sort of just pick it up. And we don't know if there's going to be a third season, et cetera. And, the animation team in Japan in particular really likes you. Hasbro likes you, et cetera. And I said, okay. And I sort of went into it having never run anything like this before. And it was sort of the show, especially story-wise, was really messy. And I don't particularly care for the Titan's Return, at all. And it was story-wise, it's just Trypticon walking for 10 episodes. And but what that did was, and that's where I met Matt Murray, who I was talking about earlier. He was at the time working for Machinima and sort of assigned to the project to handle the thing because the showrunner needed assistance at that time, and you can't run a show by yourself. There's no, even Steven Spielberg doesn't run a show by himself. You know what I mean? You got to have competent people, and Matt was that person. And Matt and I really bonded really quickly, and we got the show back on track because it was going to get delayed and all this stuff. It had a lot of problems, and we got it back on track. And Hasbro and Machinima in particular and Verizon, who was carrying the show, distributing the show, really liked that we sort of got it back on track and really smoothed it out. So we got a third season. So we just kept going. We went into what was eventually called Power of the Primes. So when you watch Power of the Primes, story-wise, it's very, very different. And there was a really great executive at Machinima named Jamie Rocklianos, who co-wrote a lot of those scripts. And he really, because I was off doing Titan's Return, but he set the creative direction for Power of the Primes. And together we were able to really get that on track. And then Jamie went off to work at DC Comics, ironically enough. He runs Jeff Johns' company now. And while we were doing Power of the Primes, and then at that point we got Mark Hamill in it. I was able to cast the people I wanted for the third one, like Ron Perlman and Mark Hamill. And we got all these really cool actors, and we brought Peter Cullen in and all this stuff. And while that was going on, Hasbro had said to us, hey, we want to do more. I'm probably jumping too far ahead, but we want to do more. And we're going to do this thing called War for Cybertron. And this was almost now 3.5 years ago. So they flew me to Rhode Island, to Pawtucket, where Hasbro is. And I sat down, and I'm already under 12 NDAs. If I say something, somebody shows up somewhere and, grabs me and all that stuff. And, you never hear from me again. And I was showing them, I had just started getting animation in Power of the Primes. And they said, all right, we want to show you War for Cybertron. And they gave me sort of an outline of here's what the toys for 2019, 20, and 21 were going to be. And I sort of said, I can make a great story out of this. But they didn't want it as a digital series. They were like, listen, we've explored digital space. We need a bigger audience for it. And then in just what was a complete coincidence, I had sold another show, which hasn't been announced yet, another anime to Netflix based on a popular property, a video game property. And we're still in production on that. Matt and I are doing that one too. But Hasbro didn't know that. And they were like, we'd love to get something on Netflix. And I was like, okay. So I called Netflix Japan because that group is in Japan. And I said, well, would you guys be interested in Transformers? And I said, of course, come in to the LA office and, pitch us the idea. And I took them through the idea of the 3 chapters, which was, again, at that point, very simple and basic, which was, okay, the first one's called Siege, and it's like a Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, war thing. And by the way, this is Hasbro sort of mandating those things, and then they let you go create whatever. And they said the second one's called Earthrise, and it's like Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica. They're going to go into space and encounter crazy things. And third one's going to be Beast Wars. And, the return of, like, we want G1 characters and Beast Wars characters to interact. And when they first told me that, I was like, oh, oh, wow, that's a lot of pressure. Like, how do you do that? And I told Hasbro all this, and they went, I told Netflix all this, and they were like, great, yeah, we're in. And that's how we got started. It took a long time to sort of put the deals together and all that stuff, but I was still doing Power of the Prime. So literally I went from getting fired off Combiner Wars, coming back in the middle of Titan's Return, and then here I am 4 years later, I'm in the middle of Kingdom right now. Sorry, that was really long-winded answer to your question.
But that really tells us how long in advance Hasbro plans out the toy lines and any related media. That's almost 4 years before they even put a toy out.
Oh yeah, no. I've already, they already, like, I've seen up to 2024. You know what I mean? Like, I just, like, they're such a machine, and they're great. Like, I absolutely love working with them. Especially the toy people, the brand people, like the Ben Montano and John Warden at the time. Now he's on Power Rangers. But, when we started War for Cybertron, there was another trip back to Rhode Island where you sit in a room and it's like, like me and so when I did War for Cybertron, I brought George Christic back, and so he was going to, he started the development process of that before he went back he works at Blizzard. So he and I went to Rhode Island and we sat in a room with like, I'm not joking, like 17 or 18 people, all the different divisions of the Transformers brand, from publishing to the toys to the marketing and all that stuff. And they would say, here's what we're going to do. And I would come armed with questions like, here's what I'm going to do. And is this okay? And, they're really super collaborative and open-minded, to what we wanted to do with the brand. But yeah, to your point, that meeting I'm telling you about right now was 2018 or 19. I don't even remember now. At least 2018. And, and you have to sit there, and that's what people don't understand. They don't understand, like, I hope that, like, I'll see somebody say, like, the animation looks much better in Earthrise. They obviously listened to the internet reaction. It's like, no, sorry, we, like, did that like a year ago. You know what I mean? Like, we already produced that. We just, it's a process. So, which was different because when we did Prime Wars, we did have breaks in between, like, meaning they weren't guaranteed there was going to be another season. So, like, when we were doing Combiner Wars, there was no guarantee there was a second one. And then they went and did the second one, and they didn't know there was going to be a third one, but there was a gap. Like, you could read the reactions to it and sort of go, okay, people like this and don't like that. Whereas with this one, we produced it like as if it was all one giant show. You know what I mean? Like, it was like all one 18 episode series. And by the way, it's also for economic reasons, like, that way you're not shutting down teams and bringing people back, and you can't get everybody. It's like the same team throughout the whole thing. The only thing that changes is the writers.
So that does bring me to ask, was the Prime Wars trilogy meant to be a continuation of the original G1 storyline?
Yeah, I think in the mind of when we broke that story, and again, I had no sort of say over the animation style, et cetera. The idea was, and this is the way Hasbro told me they look at it, is Prime Wars is the end of G1. Right? Like, I don't know if you watched it, but, like, killing Megatron, not killing, Megatron disappears at the end, and you have Primal and Prime sort of going into new generation. The idea was, like, you could hand it off. Like, this would close that chapter. Whether or not it works, I don't know. I can't speak for that. The only one I can speak confidently is War for Cybertron. But Prime Wars was always meant to be, in my mind, part of the G1 universe.
So, going to, because you've already talked about your executive producing credit on War for Cybertron. Was the experience different from Power of the Primes
Yeah, it was
overall?
totally different. It was totally different because it's totally different because we got to start it from scratch. Whereas Combiner Wars was different showrunner, different, and it's also, by the way, different medium. Digital is different. Digital series on YouTube is very different than a Netflix series, which we were talking about before. Like, technically, yes, it's a TV series. You know what I mean? Like, you have to approach it that way. So, and also because of where Hasbro wanted War for Cybertron to exist in the franchise, which was sort of a pre-G1 thing. You know what I mean? Like, and of course, I mean, you see when you watch Kingdom, there's a bunch of curveballs that sort of, especially with the Beast Wars characters, all that stuff. But it was always, Hasbro sort of dictates where they want these things. And again, they're very nice about it. Like, they're very collaborative. Like, there's very little conflict, but I don't know if that answers the question properly, but
because we can assume that Earthrise, when they went through the transwarp portal, is it transwarp or whatever? We can assume that they also traveled back in time. Hence, that's why Kingdom makes sense.
Well, the way I'm looking at it, okay, and this is sort of spoiler alert, is we're leaving that vague. I mean, look, they're going to prehistoric Earth. You know that. You see it at the end of Earthrise. They live. But the question is, you don't know how far of a prequel this is to G1. So if G1 is technically 1980, whatever, right? Did they go through time? And again, we didn't want to be that clear about it. It's intentionally vague because when you're dealing with time travel and time, like, they could have gone to another timeline. They could have gone to, they could have gone ahead in time. They could have gone back in time. We can't dictate it based on Earth's timeline versus Cybertron's timeline. You know what I mean? Like, that's the way I'm looking at it. But the idea was, the Kingdom, and I'm trying to do this without spoiling, and it's because it's so fresh in my head right now, is Kingdom is the trickiest, obviously, of the bunch. Because you have to, of the 3 chapters, because you have to retroactively sort of honor Beast Wars, but you inherently contradict it. And you contradict G1 just by the very nature of having these characters meet. Right? Because what you don't want to do is the cliche, they meet and then something happens, they forget it happens. That's such a corny comic book 30 years ago thing. So, whatever happens in Kingdom has to have a definitive effect on both sides. But that doesn't mean you change the pillars of it. That's why at the end of Earthrise, you get that classic shot of Dinobot and the ship and the eye and all that stuff. Like you honor it. And that's what we've tried to do, for better or for worse, people like it or not, is try to honor everything that's come before, but at least create something new. And that's the tricky part of working with these things, is you can't make everybody happy. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes I'll sit there. This is like, now it's turning into therapy. You're like my therapist, and you're sitting there going, I want to honor this, but I want to do something new and bring something fresh to it. And sometimes that means you have to conveniently, step on things that came before, but there's so many iterations of it, and there are things like, I'll sit there, we'll be watching, this is even when we were doing Siege and Earthrise, we sit there and go, oh, we're going to get killed for this. We're going to get killed for something, right? And then people like, oh, no problem with that, but we hate this other thing. You know what I mean? Like, you'll find something that you never would have thought of. You know what I mean? Like, you never would have thought of this, and it's like, oh, okay. But there were key things we wanted to do with it that Hasbro let us do. Like, there wasn't anything Hasbro was like, no, don't do that, other than unless it applied to continuity. When I started working with Hasbro, this is another sort of inside baseball thing, is they were in the process, this is during Combiner Wars, they were in the process of aligning the continuity, meaning like they didn't internally have like a strict Transformers thing. They were like, here's the continuity, like a DC Comics or a Marvel and all that, right? So that's what they wanted to do, and that's what So like you'll see us in Cyberverse align creatively. Like it's different, but it's Optimus throwing the Allspark into a space bridge. Like it happens in both shows. That's something, we couldn't have anybody else throw the Allspark, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I look at it like this. Prime Wars Trilogy, post G1, War of Cybertron, whole different ballpark, different timeline, different universe.
Right.
Kind of like how
I
was going to say, kind of like how IDW rebooted their comic books.
Well, the way I look at this, at our trilogy for War for Cybertron, is like the J.J. Abrams Star Trek, right? The first one, which is like, hey, if you watch this for 40 years, all that happened. It's just here's a different spin on it, and it could connect in some way. That's like us connecting to Beast Wars. Like it could, and that's, maybe I was, or we promoted it too much. Like, oh, it's a G1 prequel. It's still its own thing. Like in my mind, after this, a version of G1 happens that doesn't include characters we've killed off, like Ultra Magnus and stuff like that. Like, and that's somebody else's job to sort of figure out. Maybe it's IDW or another series or something like that. But you know what I mean? Like, you understand it, like the way you just described it.
This is your Kelvin timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, so that also leaves the implication that while these guys, the Autobots and Cybertrons, are crashing on Earth and Dinobots are already there, that could mean that there's already an arc buried in the mountain.
I can't do that. Though. You see what I'm saying? Like, so here's the problem with this, and I'm just being honest, and that's the problem. I'm always too honest on these interviews. Is I've just spent 12 episodes of the G1 era characters and setting up those relationships, those conflicts, etc. And again, this is Hasbro. Hey, we're going to do this thing with Beast Wars. Is like, I've got to sit there and figure out with the writers how these Beast Wars characters are going to fit into the story that we set up for the 12 episodes beforehand, while also trying to be as loyal to those characters in that story as possible. So the problem is, and I get what you're saying, because I come from that comic background of Crisis on Infinite Earths and all these crazy things where it's like Batman meets Batman, Earth 2 Batman, and all that stuff. That's my favorite. I love that stuff, right? The problem becomes if I sit there and then you have the arc crashes and then there's another arc and then there's another thing. It's like, I only have 6 episodes to explain this, which is too short to begin with. You know what I mean? That was like my big fight, is I wanted more episodes. So I have to, in Kingdom, the writers and I have to figure out how to tie up the trilogy, but also integrate these new Beast Wars characters into it. And, and we want it to be super loyal to that story. So it's still the classic setup of why they're on Earth and the Golden Disc and Beast Wars Megatron steals it and they chase him across the galaxy. I mean, it's just, the beauty of Beast Wars was not all that was explained, so it gives us a little more wiggle room to sit there and explain some of it, or at least give some meat on that bone of the backstory of Beast Wars. So that's what we're trying to do. But yeah, I would love to do this, like 12 alternate realities and all this stuff, and it's Crisis on Infinite Earths, but I'm working in a really tiny window of storytelling.
Okay, so leaving Transformers, what other roles have you played in the film industry? So you mentioned you did some television, you've done mostly movies. Do we consider Prime Wars and War for Cybertron technically television? I mean, because you do differentiate between streaming and Netflix. So how do
it is, I mean, it's technically the same thing. I mean, still producing content, especially in this modern era. People consume content on everything, phones and the laptop and all that stuff. So it's a whole different world. I mean, for me, I come from a feature film background. I had done these feature films, but in the last year also as an executive producer of a TV show that was on Sci-Fi Channel called Vagrant Queen, which was based on a comic book from a publisher called Vault, who I'm partnered with, to be sort of their entertainment guy and sort of get these things set up. And for that was a much more, passive role, which was, okay, I was sort of the gatekeeper to the IP. Like the people that wanted to make it had to sort of sell me on it. Okay, great. They did a good job of sort of convincing us. And my sort of involvement was giving notes on the creative, on the development and looking at edits of it and stuff like that. I was never on set. But I'm the executive producer of it. And there's multiple executive producers, different functions, people who are there. The showrunner, there's a woman who ran that show, very similar to how I run Transformers. She's the creative boss of this whole thing and casting it and stuff like that. When I did The Spirit, it was like I was mentioning before, very much all the aspects from, script stage to editing. It's a day-by-day thing and it's a project-by-project thing. So it varies. I'm lucky, with Transformers in particular, and this other show we're doing is like you get to be the boss of it.
Okay. So we're going to delve a little bit into fantasy here. Now, what types of content would you have liked to make if you had unlimited resources? Like what is the dream project?
The dream project, no joke. There's very little market for it. I would love to do kung fu movies. Okay, that's the first thing. It's like I'm literally wearing a Chow Yun Fat T-shirt right now. But I would love to make like a Hong Kong. I grew up with Hong Kong action cinema. I love all that stuff. I'd love to make something like that. With unlimited funds, I'd love to make a big Star Wars thing or Star Trek. I would love to do Star Trek. I've written Star Trek comics, but not anything more than that. And then something original. Like I created a book called Failsafe, which Vault published a couple of years ago, which I set up as a movie at Netflix with Michael B. Jordan. We're writing the script now. It's from the writer of Black Panther. So that's one of my bucket list things, is maybe hopefully we get that made in the next couple of years. To see something I created get made, that'd be a real dream.
Okay. So is there anything else you'd like to mention about your films and or television career?
No, that I'm lucky to do all this stuff. I'm so fortunate that all this, I somehow get to be involved with all the things I loved as a kid. And, if anything, it's taught me an appreciation for the people who've come before us, who had the responsibility of making these things, when technology was not what it is today, et cetera. I have a real, and that's why I think I'm fortunate to keep working, is I think because I just understand the love of this kind of thing. I always try to approach everything from multiple points of view, but always start from a fan point of view. What do the people want? Et cetera. That's that, and I just, knock on something, can keep going, being involved with these things for the rest of my life.
What are you doing now, and how can people find out more about you online? Now, I have your Facebook and your Instagram, and they both are FJ DeSanto. Is there anywhere else anybody can find anything more about you or what you're currently working on?
No, those are the two places. That's where I post everything anyway. Right now I'm in the middle of I've got a little more to do on Kingdom, so we get that out this year. And then there's a second show I'm doing for Netflix, which probably come out next year. And that's keeping me occupied, working with that company I was talking about before, Vault Comics. I just put a book together for them called Bleed Them Dry, which we raised the money out of Japan to produce the comic, and now we're going to try and take that out and do it as an anime. So, it's like anything. You have a bunch of things you're juggling nonstop, but right now the priority is Transformers and the other show.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking with me today. And for everybody else, if you have any comments or questions, please post those. And thank you for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe.